Good morning. This is January the 3rd, 2016. Sounds odd to say that, but we at Heritage wish you a Happy New Year. This morning we are going to be discussing a passage in Luke where at age 12, Jesus' parents take him to the temple. Often this is presented simply as a quaint story about the fact that Jesus was very smart when it came to religious questions. But is there something else that we can find there, that we can use today in our lives as Christians seeking to follow Jesus? We hope that this service will be a blessing to you, and we also hope that if you're in the area, in Annapolis, on a Sunday at 10:30, that you'll drop by 1740 Forest Drive and join us for worship. Again, Happy New Year from all of us at Heritage.
The scripture reading this morning comes from the second chapter of Luke, beginning verse 41. Every year his parents went to Jerusalem for the feast of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up to the feast according to the custom. After the feast was over, while his parents were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but they were unaware of it. Thinking he was in their company, they traveled on for a day. Then they began looking for him among the relatives and friends. When they did not find him, they went back to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. His mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us like this? Your father and I have been anxiously searching for you." "Why are you searching for me?" he asked. "Didn't you know I had to be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he was saying to them. Then he went down to Nazareth with them and was obedient to them. But his mother treasured all these things in her heart, and Jesus grew in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and men. This is the word of the Lord.
Do you ever find it as amazing as I do that Ralph is able to get such fantastic music out of such a variety of folks? I am constantly amazed and grateful. Ralph, thank you. And thank you to the youth choir, even those who I believe have ducked out to help with the nursery and the smaller children this morning. And some of them are returning. Oh, goody. The story we just heard has always bothered me. Is there anybody else in here that story has kind of bothered just a little bit? No, maybe. Thank you. See, what always bothered me about the story, well, there are a couple of things. The first thing that bothered me is that I imagined myself going on a trip with my parents and disappearing for 3 days. Yeah. This would explain why we hear nothing about Jesus in Luke from the time he's 12 to the time he's 30. He was grounded for 18 years. The other thing is you begin to think if that had happened in our day, someone would have reported him to protective services. What kind of family? Oh, I have to be real careful because I've almost driven off from the restroom, the rest area. You know how it is. You got a car full of kids and you're on vacation. I won't ask who's done that, but you can get down the road and go, let me make sure I've got them all. So, but you put that in its context. Here is Jesus. He's 12 years old. He lives in a culture oppressed by the Romans. traveling from Nazareth to Jerusalem on a road beleaguered by bandits. And when he doesn't show up for the first year, nobody bats an eye. What do you think that's about? Poor parenting? I'm getting a no. No, I'm not going to say that Jesus had poor parents. Lee's over there going, oh my goodness, what's he going to say this morning? What I'm going to say is that Jesus had a familial community around him where his parents could go, you seen Jesus? No, but he's probably back there with John and Elizabeth. He'll be okay. They didn't worry for a while because there was a community around that boy that let them feel like that boy was protected. You know, I saw that Tuesday. I asked his permission to use him as a sermon illustration, so I'm not stepping over my bounds. But my buddy Robert had a new tie, and he was having a little trouble with it. It was amazing how many people hovered around him to help him figure out how to tie that tie. We were all there. Sister, uncles, even me, and I can't tie a tie for beans. There was a community of family around Robert in which he could feel safe and held and cared for. So aside from one of the primary things that I think Luke is doing with this story, which is to tell us just how deeply Jesus was rooted in his Jewishness, because it was required of every good Jew that they make the trip to the temple at least once a year, and that he did that every year he went up to the temple. And from 12 until 30 was sort of a time for you to develop a profession, and at 30 you begin what was called your public life. The thing this story has to tell you and me is that Jesus was surrounded by a community of care. Now, I want to read you another story that I think is a little different. It comes from the book of Acts. And it's a story about Paul. It's from the 20th chapter, if you want to go home and look it up. And he was in Troas. I hope I pronounced that right. And on the first day of the week, when we met to break bread, Paul was holding a discussion with them since he intended to leave the next day. And he continued speaking until midnight. This is proof that Paul was a Baptist. He did not know when to stop preaching. There were many lamps in the room upstairs where they were meeting, and a young man named Eutychus, I love it when I can pronounce that right, who was sitting in the window. Some of you have heard this story, you know what's coming. Began to sink off into a deep sleep while Paul talked still longer. So you're not the first people who ever slept through a sermon. Overcome by sleep, he fell to the ground 3 floors below and was picked up dead. But Paul went down and bending over him, took him in his arms and said, "Don't be alarmed, for his life is in him." Then Paul went upstairs, and after he'd broken bread and eaten, he continued to converse with them until dawn. Yep, he's a Baptist. Nothing stops him from preaching. And then he left. Meanwhile, they'd taken the boy away alive, not a little comforted. That's another strange story. You sort of wonder what to do with it. I do. You wonder how come it was that nobody in that entire congregation of people didn't look and go, "Knucklehead, put your feet on the floor." That's all it would take. Compare those two boys, those three boys, 12, and who knows. A community that didn't pay so much attention as to say, dude, you're going to fall out the window. How many people have we seen fall out the windows of the church? Into what? I don't know how you feel, and I won't ask you, and it's none of my business about the politics of the death of Tamir Rice. But that was a 12-year-old child. Where was the community around that boy? When we put these stories together, and we think to ourselves, on the one hand, of people held like Robert and Jesus in communities of love that will not let them go, even if they have to shake them like a rag doll, and people who are so busy listening to the preacher that they can't say, dude, put your feet on the floor. What does that call us to? Well, we've got a good start, I tell you. Our youth group and our children's work has a good start. But when we think about the community around this church, are we creating a place where they can feel loved and secure? Where they can hear us when we say, put your feet on the floor, you're going to fall out the window? Are we keeping an eye on the people we love so that they don't fall asleep, lulled to sleep by a world that could care less? Now, I'm glad that Paul went out and that this boy lived and he went home and everybody was comforted. But I asked myself as a preacher, what's the matter with Paul that he doesn't notice that this boy's starting to lean a little bit? What do these stories have to say to us? Communities of love and safety. Communities that you just don't know. How will we move toward being more and more of this over here? Not just to our own kids, which is incredibly important. Because frankly, their parents depend on us, Sunday school teachers, associate pastors, ministers of music, interim pastors, to say, put your feet on the floor. But to a larger community, how do we make a place for them here? How do we make this a place that you can come and be and know that you are loved? I'm not here to scold anybody. I'm here simply to raise the question. What would it call us to do and be? What challenges might it offer? What might we have to do new? I know it's an old joke, but you know what the 7 last words of the church are. We never did it that way before. So, as we think about this boy Jesus, who became who he became in part, not to take away from being the Son of God, but in part because he was loved by a community. Then that story becomes more than, well, Jesus was really smart about church stuff, and he probably won his sword drill every week. It becomes about the kind of community that holds you close and protects you and loves you, and how we become that ourselves. And this church can do that. I've seen this church do that. This church can be and do anything it wants. Can we become a place of safety, a place of love for those who have no place of safety? I am going to do a little bit of meddling. Paul in Corinthians jumps on the Corinthians because it appears that some of the folks are coming to worship early, and they had meals. I mean, their communion meals were meals. And the folks who were coming early ate all the food before other people could get there. And so if you were a slave and you got off work whenever they let you off, and you came in to the communion meal, there might not be anything there for you. And Paul said, to do this is to eat and drink unworthily. And to do this is to eat and drink damnation to yourself. This is Paul, not me. Argue with him. The meal of love that we are given, and that is symbolized at this table, has to be exercised off in acts of love and kindness, in mercy, in care for those who cannot care for themselves. Or we begin to look like some religion's version of that penguin I was talking about, walking around going, isn't it great that Jesus loves me? Well, yeah, but he didn't give you this meal just for you or for me. And so we are called, even as we are invited, we are called to be places of safety and love and mercy. Places like Jesus had. Places like Robert has. Places where all our children, whether they are directly our children or whether they are the children of our community, can know that this is a place that loves you enough to say, put your feet on the floor, dude. Don't fall out the window. Amen and amen.